everyday basis. All right, so Kansas, this has been part of an investigation that's lasted for, it seems like, at least 3 to 4 years. In a decision announced Wednesday, the NCAA's accountability review, this is a part of, rather than going in front of the, Committee on Infractions, you can have this secondary, like mediation, so to speak, like a completely unbiased group, ultimately judging this is a level 2 case against Kansas, 5 allegations of level 1, ultimately judging this is a level 2 case. The resolution panel giving Kansas a 3-year probation, slap on the wrist, with no effect on the program's postseason status. They can make it postseason. Head coach Bill Self was initially charged with a level 1 violation, has been suspended for 4 games last year, was instead charged with level 2. Level 3. Curtis Townsend, who was suspended 4 games, also had his degree reduced from level 1 to level 2 and a level 3 violation. Neither coach faces show cause order, which could have also been applicable for level 1 violations.
They will have to vacate the 2018 season, which, from their perspective, the NCAA let Silvio De Sousa play during that time and ruled on it then and take down the Final Four banner that they have from that. But that's really the most severe thing that happened to them, was vacating those wins, because it makes them now no longer the winningest program in college basketball history. But that's
due time.
That's 6 years of work, of which the FBI did most of it 6 years ago. And that's what the NCAA and this independent council came to, and just kind of shows you, like, why there needs to be reform. Not that, like, I very intentionally will not take a stance on this, but it is. You're not going to get away with that. I will take the stance that every penalty needs to be the same. Like, if the 3 of us all robbed the same bank, we should go to jail for the same amount of time. Right. Like it. So either, be fair to Oklahoma State and Louisville and all those other ones, or don't. Like, I didn't think anything was going to happen, but this just shows why the NCAA needs reform, because the fact that it took 6 years to get to this, and then you're also, look, from Kansas's perspective, you're hanging it over their head all this time, right?
Not really.
But like you all.
You think they were ever worried about this?
I mean, probably
Bill
not.
Self lost a night of sleep.
Bill Self have like a video of him with the chain on and all that after all this happened. So, like, was he worried about this? I don't think so.
It's not what happened to Oklahoma State, but they also released a statement saying they agree with today's decision. And, of course, in the same conference, Craig, here's Oklahoma State. We agree, as we stated at the time, that the NCAA should be intentional in prescribing penalties that do not negatively impact student-athletes, including bans from postseason play for violations that occurred years prior. It is good to see the NCAA make decisions with this intent, even if it was too late to help us.
Yeah, I don't think Kansas was ever worried about this one bit. I think, if anything, they flaunted that they weren't worried about it. So, to that end, they were, I guess, correct in doing so, the feeling that they didn't have anything to really worry about. And, yeah, it sucks to lose some wins, Final Four appearance in that year as well. But, yeah, I think that they'll be just fine, and it certainly beats any type of alternative where you could have had much harsher penalties. I think that, this brings to a close the long saga of that 2017 report that blew everything open and was going to kill college basketball and did nothing of the sort. That was a bit overblown, imagine that, by the media at the time, and that's now all done. All those cases are wrapped up, and so Kansas, the last in that set, and now I guess everybody moves on to some extent. But yeah, I think with a lot of questions in mind and a lot of changes needed for the future to make this, I think, a more transparent process, and just to make more sense of it all, because it's all very confusing on what constitutes what versus this team, and why is Oklahoma State like the poster child of getting, like the biggest punishment. And I know that you just read their statement, but they've been obviously very active today in responding to what was handed down to KU. So, I mean, I'm glad it's all over and all wrapped up. But I don't feel like outside of the initial reporting on it, it was ever that big of a deal really in the grand scheme of things. Like, you can disagree with that, but I don't feel like it ever took over front page news and was like, this is the end. Because that's the way it was portrayed, like the first time the report came out. And literally what's different about college basketball really from then until now. I don't know how much really is different, and I don't know how much you really scared away others from, trying to potentially do similar things in the future. So good for KU that, there weren't harsher penalties and they can move on and that everybody else can move on. But, yeah, just glad to see this wrapped up, and hopefully it leads to some better enforcement and just a better, clearer way of how things operate when it comes to these universities and their programs and these rule-breaking allegations.
There's one thing you want to avoid, period. You can take away banners. You can, you don't want to lose a national championship. Kansas can spit out Final Four appearances with the best of them. You do not want a postseason ban. That's what Oklahoma State got. You're not going to get that. Kansas is very fortunate, but at the same time, if you're a KU fan, you might want to say, well, wait a minute. Here's what taking down a banner to me means. It's like saying Reggie Bush didn't win the Heisman Trophy. Taking down a banner, and especially like a place like Kansas or anywhere, is like changing whatever you have when it comes to your drapes.
It doesn't, look, eventually that banner will find its way back up there in a few years because the NCAA, we know, is on the way to being different. They have committee after committee after committee trying to figure out how to make the rules different, how to make the enforcement different, how to do this. And I do think part of that is that eventually school's going to go, hey, can we just, all the wins we had to vacate for all that other stuff, can we just put that back? Because it doesn't really seem like that's really that. First of all, vacating wins has deterred nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. And all it does is try to pretend like, well, this happened because we caught this team in a violation when, if you want to vacate wins for every NCAA violation that's ever happened, then probably nobody's ever had a win ever.
Yeah, it's interesting, but that's the story. When this first came down, like Craig mentioned, this was like everybody, oh my God, this is the biggest scandal in the history of anything. And then here we are years later, and really there was very little that was done.
Okay, and so here's where Kansas was able to take advantage and game the system a little bit. Because everything that they were in trouble for, not everything they were in trouble for, but the stuff that they are in trouble for is now accepted practice, and they're finding a way to make it legal and profitable for everybody involved. So to punish Kansas now, that it took 6 years, and in those 6 years, hey, Adidas giving money to a kid for going to Kansas is totally legal now, in a sense. How can they punish them now? That you're like, well, before it was legal, you did it, but now we've made it legal in large part because the FBI had this whole investigation into things, and maybe it made us realize that, we can't really keep out ahead of this, and we have to make it work for us instead of against us.
Yeah, there you go. Craig, anything else on that?
No, I just don't think Kansas ever cared that they cheated. I don't think they were ever really worried about this, and I think most people figure this was probably the outcome. I know they self-imposed penalties and all that, and not making them out to be a bad guy in any way, but it just feels like it was one big hype bubble that affected some, programs worse than others. But, not surprised that KU's getting what they want really in the end as compared to the worst case scenario. So, yeah, good for them. They can move on. Like I said, everybody else can move on. Some will have, harsher feelings about how it all worked than others, like a Mike Boynton, for example.
Right.
But, I just think the whole thing's confusing. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things. And we can retroactively try to say, well, it really wasn't that bad because it was legal. It was, it's legal now, all we want. But, that's an argument that doesn't really matter anymore because it's case closed now. And it's moving on regardless of how everybody feels about it. So that's case closed, and we move forward. And, we'll see what kind of, system is put together and how this is, all dealt with moving forward, especially this NIL era. It's a lot more, it's a lot more open, like Paul said, and it's a lot of these issues would not be as much of issues. And so, just curious kind of how all these types of things are handled, in the coming years.
Of the last, let's say, 5 years, Paul, Craig, of anybody that looked like they were about to get the hammer, North Carolina, did they get hammered?
Yeah, initially, but then they
Won the appeal, right?
Won the appeal. They won in court.
Kansas, of course, with theirs. And it's always like, oh, my God. And Baylor football, after what they went through, there were so many people that just thought you should shut down the program. You could have an opinion. But it was most of everything that was like maybe clutching your pearls was not even an NCAA issue. It was not underneath their boundaries or underneath what they do as the guidelines of running college athletics.
And one of the things that happened to the NCAA was when they had to give back all of Joe Paterno's wins for the Jerry Sandusky penalty, that opened up a lot of legal room for people to say, like, well, you try to punish them for that, and they got it taken away, and all the stuff that we've done is far less egregious and horrible than what went on at Penn State. So if that, you can't punish people for that or take away things for that, that's why eventually all this will go away, because they overstepped there, because they didn't actually have legal right to punish Penn State for doing that and lost that case, as terrible as it was. So then all these people who are just, giving people $50,000 were like, well, I mean, if you can't police that, you can't police anything. And it's opened up this whirlwind of terror for them, which is why they keep losing lawsuits, because it was built on a shaky premise in the first place.
You know who's relieved today? Wichita State. They were probably thinking that Kansas was underneath the investigation and they would be the ones that probably would get the probation or any kind of NCAA infractions. Tonight in college